Let's start with that East Room. You were there. Set the scene for us.
Well, it's quite something. And, you know, we received invitations from the White House Social Office very late yesterday afternoon, so the decision really had not leaked. I certainly hoped that I was there to see the nomination of my former boss, Judge Kavanaugh. A lot of former law clerks were there, as well as friends from his life, family members, his priest, high school classmates, and it was really a celebration of him and of the great nomination of the man and the judge we support.
We heard from the president and we've heard from others ways in which Judge Kavanaugh, about to be, it appears, Justice Kavanaugh, is similar to Justice Kennedy. In what ways might he differ from your experience? You've worked with both men.
Sure. Well, I think, you know, to start with the similarities, I think both in jurisprudence, but really as men up close, both of whom I've worked for, the work ethic, the fidelity to the Constitution, and really the commitment to the rule of law, that was a theme you heard Judge Kavanaugh echo last night that I know is very dear to Justice Kennedy's heart. In terms of difference, I do think Justice Kennedy may be more of a California libertarian pragmatist, and Judge Kavanaugh possibly a bit more of a formalist in terms of legal interpretive methods, but a lot of overlap from the standpoint of different areas of the law where they probably would agree and end up voting together if they would have served at the same time on the court.
Let's talk about those legal interpretive methods, because one of the things that people have focused on, and we certainly have focused on here in Bloomberg, is his decisions, that is Judge Kavanaugh's decisions in the administrative law area, dealing with regulatory agencies like the Consumer Financial Protection Board, for example, his decision striking that down. Are we reading it correctly that given his attitude towards separation of powers, Article 2 powers of the president, he really is likely to be more open to the question of what is called the regulatory state?
I think you are reading that correctly. And of course, Judge Kavanaugh sits right now on the Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit here in Washington, which hears a lot of those administrative agency cases. So he has a great deal of experience in that area and has commented publicly and in scholarly work as well as judicial decisions about what's called the Chevron doctrine, not to get too wonky on everyone, but a doctrine that goes into when and how courts defer to administrative agencies' views of their own power. He has been a skeptic of that doctrine, but I would note that Justice Kennedy is a skeptic of it as well. And in one of his final opinions that he wrote, Justice Kennedy issued a concurrence a couple of weeks ago saying that he too thought that that doctrine was due for a fresh look.
So that's the Chevron doctrine, which is really deferring to the agency's interpretation of the statute. Maybe we wouldn't defer as much. That's one thing. Another thing is really revisiting the question, going back to the 1930s, of whether it's appropriate to have so-called independent regulatory agencies that are not subject to presidential control. After all, the president can't call up the head of the SEC the way he can call up the head of the Treasury Department and tell him what to do. Is it possible that would be on the table?
I think you'll see Judge Kavanaugh as someone who, if he becomes Justice Kavanaugh, has an assertive voice in those conversations. He issued a dissent about 9 years ago in a case involving the structure of the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board, which was a creation of Sarbanes-Oxley. His dissent in that case on the D.C. Circuit was ultimately adopted in a 5-4 decision by the Supreme Court. So there is not just Judge Kavanaugh, but there are other justices on the court who do share the view that someone ultimately has to be in charge in the executive branch, and there's some tension, as you note, between those quote-unquote independent agencies and the executive power under Article 2 being vested in the President of the United States.
And finally, address one question that at least has occurred to me, and that is diversity in the court. And that doesn't necessarily mean gender diversity, racial diversity, but increasingly we seem to see people that look like the same people. They went to the same schools. Sure. I mean, Judge Kavanaugh clerked with Neil Gorsuch, the justice who's on the Supreme Court right now. They went to high school together.
Yes.
They go to the same schools. They have the same experience. Is there any risk there in not having different points of view expressed among those 9 people in the conference?
Well, I think you do see a lot of educational overlap in terms of where they went to law school. But the point I would note is that Yale Law, Harvard Law, and other top-flight schools really recruit the best students from all across the country. So you have a lot of Yale and Harvard lawyers on the Supreme Court, but you have Justice Thomas from Pinpoint, Georgia, and Justice Sotomayor from the Bronx, and a lot of different walks of life and life experiences in between. And I think Judge Kavanaugh will add to that rich picture.